Welcome back to Cottage Treasures Quilting. I'm Alain Dupuis. Behind the camera is my wife Delilah Dupuis. Today we are going to teach you some new techniques that are going to help bring up your quilts to competition stage. Move a little bit off of beginner and add some tips and tricks into your trunk to help you smash out nicer quilts. So behind me you can see Turtle Encounters by Sue Sherman. She's a great friend of ours, and we are going to touch into her techniques, and she is going to teach us how to build this beautiful quilt top. So to teach you these tips and tricks, we've brought out the big guns, a good friend of ours, Sue Sherman. Sue Sherman, we met her in Toronto quite a few years back at the Canadian National Quilt Show in Toronto, where she was a winner in the judged competition for her quilt art called Huddles. It's a bunch of penguins huddled together. She's also known for winning the IQA in Houston as well as the Paducah AQS, and she's been featured in quilt magazines as well. Sue is the designer and creator of this stunning Turtle Encounters art quilt. She will gracefully guide you firsthand through all the steps. She includes her hands-down easier applique method she calls the jigsaw method for making the quilt top. Then she'll reveal her delicious secret details on how to sew those impressive creases in the neck and shoulders. It really looks like wrinkled turtle skin if you look close, as well as her tips behind the three-dimensional look she gives the turtle shells, the fin, and the head. This tutorial will work from both Turtle Encounters and her other quilt called Bashful Huna. If you're just starting out and you're not as comfortable as you'd like to be with free motion quilting, have no fear. Sue is going to show you two different methods where she does use free motion foot as well as a regular walking foot on a domestic home sewing machine. So Sue will show you both techniques to help you feel more comfortable. If you want to go right back to the beginning and you haven't watched our previous videos, we have quite a few videos where we teach thousands of people how to start free motion quilting on your home sewing machine. So all of Sue Sherman's kits and quilt patterns are available on our website, cottagetreasures.store. You can see them here, just a few. We've got Turtle Encounters, Giraffe Duo, Bashful Huna. Being in the quilting industry for years, I can tell you that these are extremely well priced and very high quality kits, and they include all fabric that has been hand dyed by Sue Sherman. So let's dive right in and take it away, Sue.
Hi, I'm Sue Sherman from Sue Sherman Quilts. Today we're going to be making the quilt top for this art quilt called Turtle Encounter. You can make it from a pattern using your own fabrics, but today we're going to be using the kit. This same video can be used also to make this quilt called Giraffe Duo, which is also available as a pattern or a kit, and this particular one's done from the kit fabrics. Or the Bashful Honu, this quilt over here, this particular one is done with batik fabrics, but it also is available as a kit, and the kit fabrics are very similar to the ones that are used in the Turtle Encounter. If you open up the pattern, you will find that it has these detailed instructions. It also contains these pattern pieces, and we're not going to open that up right yet because it's big and takes up a lot of space. And this layout drawing. If you purchase the kit, it contains all those same things. And in addition to that, it contains these hand-dyed fabrics. The fabrics are all dyed in my laundry room, and they're all done in individual containers, and each one is unique. So if you purchase this kit and your friend purchases the kit, they won't be exactly the same. The only other thing that you're going to need in order to do the project is this piece of two-sided fusible webbing. It's 48 inches long and 24 inches wide for this project. The piece that you need is smaller for those other projects. I find that the Steamacine 2 Light product is the one that I would recommend for this project. It absolutely has to be a two-sided fusible webbing. And it has to be the kind that when you go to fuse the second side, it can be repositionable so that you can stick it on, you can stick the piece onto your other fabric and move it around while staying sticky before you iron it. If you don't have something like that, there's a lot of tiny pieces in this project, and if you can't stick them all down in the spots where they go, they're all going to get away from you. So it has to be two-sided and have to be repositionable. The only other thing that you're going to need to do the project is some tools. So you'll need a marking pen. I have an ultra fine Sharpie, but it can be any similar kind of pen. I have a pair of scissors that I'm going to use for cutting the paper. I have two examples of scissors that I like for cutting the pieces of fused fabric for the rayage applique. I have a pair of tweezers, which I really like for working with the tiny pieces. You can use eyebrow tweezers if you want, they work fine, but I have sewing tweezers, and for me, I need a pair of reading glasses in order to see everything. So, let's get started. I'm going to move these things over here for now. The first thing we need to do is open this up, and you'll notice that the pieces fit within a piece that's exactly 48 inches by 24. So that this piece of two-sided webbing is going to go exactly right on top of here, and it's going to line up perfectly. So I'm just going to trace it like this. I don't need to cut anything. It should line up just right. The other thing that we need to make sure before we start doing any tracing is that we have the right side. So this particular product has a light grid. This particular grid is yellow, so it's not that easy to see unless you're right close up. That means this is the side that you can write on, so you can have it so that side is up and it's over top. I'm going to use a couple of little pieces of tape here, but you don't really need them. Your hand is steady. And I'm going to tape it so that they line up. And now I'm just going to trace. So when I start to trace, and if you find you can't really see it well enough, you could use a light table. I don't have a light table big enough for this. But what I do often use is my window. So you can tape it up to a window and it's very, very clear to see there. You're going to need to trace all of the lines. So there's some solid lines, there's some dashed lines, and I'd recommend, if it's a dashed line, trace it as a dashed line. There's some dashed dot lines. Those ones are for placement lines, and I would recommend also tracing those as dashed dot. And then there's one spot where you have some very large dashes, and I would also recommend tracing those as very large dashes. The one thing you don't need to trace, and I'll repeat this, you do not need to trace the numbers. The numbers that are on each individual piece, I put those on for the convenience of people that are going to use some other method of making this quilt. But for my method of making this quilt, you don't need any of those numbers. They're messy, they take a long time, and I think that my method is the easiest way anyway. So I hope you find it that way too, and I hope you enjoy this. So let's just get started. I'm going to trace these. So just finishing up these last few pieces down here. You'll notice that I'm going nice and slow. If you get reasonably close to the lines that are there, I like to try to get as close as I can, but I've noticed that some of the students that I've taught are more approximate than I am. That seems to work. But I think the most important thing is that they should be relatively smooth, and that where you've got a space in between two different little scales, that they should be fairly straight in between them. And in particular, later on, we're not going to be quilting in this video, but at some point you will be quilting this. And just remember that in between each one of these little scales that you're drawing, you are going to be needing to quilt. So you're going to need to run your quilting foot in between every one of them. So you need to leave yourself enough room to do that. So now I've copied all the lines, and now I need to cut them out. So I'm going to use my scissors that I'm okay with using on paper. I'm going to take off these pieces of tape. And I'm going to cut them out along the rough cut lines, which are these dash lines that go all around the outside. And they're rough cut lines. They don't need to be perfect. You just need to, at this point, you're just separating all the pieces. So I'm going to cut out around all of the pieces. So you notice that some of the pieces are actually inside this one big piece. And the reason for that is because when we cut this big piece, this is the under or the lower carapace piece, what we want to do is have just a little strip of the fusible webbing on underneath the large piece of fabric. So the fabric is going to cover the whole area, but the fusible webbing is just going to be around the outside. The main reason for that will become very obvious once you get to the quilting, because what that does is it means that you're quilting through fewer layers of the fusible webbing product, fewer layers of fabric ultimately, and that just makes the quilting a lot easier. And if any of you have tried quilting through anything that's got adhesive on it, adhesive of any kind basically is a challenge for quilting. So we want to minimize the amount of that to the extent that we can. So I rough cut around all of the pieces, and I put them in two piles. This is the pile that's going to be made from fabric 2, and this is the pile, the smaller pile, that's going to be made from fabric 1. And this is the piece that I've cut out. I'm just going to actually not cut these large dash lines at the moment, and you'll see why later. So the next step is to iron the fabric from the kit. It's been folded up, so you need to get those creases out. I can tell you that that fabric, the cotton lawn fabric, can take a lot of ironing. It's very durable. It's a very fine weave, so you can use a lot of steam and really get those creases out. I have some fabric that's already been ironed. So what I'm going to do is, for these pieces, I am going to place them on the fabric. Now for this fabric 1, there's not a lot of placement involved. It's got an interesting pattern to it, but it's not really something where we want to do a lot of fussy cutting. So what we're going to do is remove, you see you've got the paper that we've just written on, then you've got inside some fine gummy fusible webbing, and then there's another piece of a more plasticky paper on the bottom. You're going to remove the bottom sheet of paper, and then you're going to stick this on top of the fabric. Make sure everything's all lined up. There we go. So once again, we've got the piece that we've drawn on, we've got the inside, the almost invisible actual piece of fusible webbing that is going to end up being on our fabric, and then the plasticky paper that's on the other side that needs to come off. And it's easier to pull off if you lie the whole thing flat on a table and remove it like that. That way nothing gets out of your control. I'm going to stick this on here. And it's another piece to put on there, but what I'm going to do right now is just cut across here, because what I'd like to do is show you how to do this piece. Clearly, if I remove this back sheet of paper, it's going to be very difficult to control this piece, and it's going to be very difficult for me to place it down on this fabric without everything just getting out of control. So what I'm going to do is do it the opposite way. I'm going to put this upside down, so with the writing towards the bottom. Then I'm going to remove the back paper very carefully. You might have noticed that the product really seems to want to stick to this back paper a lot more than it's wanting to stick to the front paper. So you've got to be a little careful in getting it off. But just need to be slow and methodical. It's not rocket science. And you'll notice that I've left more of the product on the inside. I didn't actually cut around these dashed lines yet. I'm going to cut those after I get the fabric mounted on them. Okay, there we are. It's all off. Now, I don't know about you, but I've made a lot of pies in my day. And one of the difficult things about doing pastry is lifting up a piece of pastry and getting onto a pie without everything falling apart. And the way you do that is by rolling it up. I'm just going to grab this pool noodle over here, and I'm going to wrap my fabric around it. You're going to wrap it around like this. Just like a rolling pin. And then I'm going to start over here, making sure that it's the right size. And I'm going to carefully unroll it over this piece. And before it gets away from me, I'm going to flatten it down like this all the way around. And as you can see, it's all nicely stuck down. So what I can do now, and I don't necessarily need to do, is go around the outside and just cut through everything except the fabric along these dashed lines. And it's really up to you how much of that you do. I certainly like to cut off these big bits that are sticking out. Obviously this wider area has made it easier. It made it more stable when I was laying it out, but we don't need them now. So that's fabric one. Fabric two. fabric 2 is a lot more interesting because what we've got here is a piece of fabric that is unique. And they all basically have the same colors. They're all made from the same dyes. But they're all placed differently, and you know, the scrunching is all a little bit different. So they all come out a little bit different. And what we want to do is now take these pieces of fabric, and these pieces are all going to be the darker colors. So you can see you've got this upper carapace, and you've got the two flippers, you've got the head, and then you've got these shoulder areas in here that are all done out of this fabric. So to start with, I'm going to start with the carapace because, and sorry, I use the term carapace. I know everyone else calls it a shell, but carapace is the correct word, and I'm a nerd, so there you go. I'm going to place it, I like to get a bit of red around the front. Maybe it's because the original photograph that I used to make this original turtle quilt, it had some red there, and the red is a perfectly natural thing on a turtle. It comes from algae. So what I might want to do is place it so that this part of the shell is going to be in this part of the fabric that's a little bit red. So I think I'm going to do that. I should mention here that this piece is the opposite of that. You can see it's going to go on the back. So what I'm doing here is the back of the fabric. Of course, this is hand-dyed fabric, and for batik it's the same. There is no front or back. If you happen to be using a printed fabric, then you're going to need to make sure that you use the back of the print. And I can tell you that after having made this with hand-dyed fabric many times, when I did try making it on a print, I had a lot of areas that I had to redo because I keep forgetting to put it on the back. But you do need to remember it goes on the back. Now, once again, I have to try to get this pesky back piece off. And I have to make sure that I get the actual gummy part needs to stay with the piece that has the writing on it. And it's going like that. There we go. Now I can tell you if you use the Steam 2, the regular version, so not light, it's a little easier to do this. But once again, when you get to the part where you're quilting, it's really much easier if you've got the light version. Especially as you're going to be, if you're going to do it the way I do it, where you're quilting through, you're going to be quilting all around these little pieces. You want to make sure that you're not setting yourself up for a difficult job there. So I'm going to put it down here with that red bit just there. Now, what I have left is the head and the left and right flipper. These are the upper pieces. And then I've got the shoulder and the neck. I want to make sure that the shoulder and the neck are in a fairly light area of the fabric. So I think I'm going to use this area here. The light area, as you can see, we've got lots of crease lines in there. These are showing the creases in the turtle's neck. You can see them in there, but they're not very visible in that one, are they? I like those to be visible. I'm going to do them in black thread. They're going to really look like creases, and the best way to make that be successful is to have enough contrast that it shows up. So I'm going to go ahead and put this shoulder piece over here, and I think maybe I want the flippers. I like to have a little navy in the flippers. I think because they're down low in the ocean. It's not a lot of navy on these ones. They're more on the head. But that's just my preference. You can do it how you like. Now, one thing you will notice is that there's plenty of fabric here. I do cut this bigger than the amount of fabric that's actually required because it is a hand dye. Sometimes certain parts of it don't turn out the way I might like. You might have some preferences that are different from my preferences. So always giving enough little extra play in the fabric gives you enough space to make sure that the pieces are going to all be they're going to all have colors and combinations of colors that are nice for you. So now I have all of my pieces and they've all been placed on and stuck onto the fabric, and the correct fabric. I'm happy with them. What I've done is I went over to my iron and I pressed them ever so lightly just to make sure that they stick down a little bit nicer. So certainly not the heavy press that you're going to give them later when it's permanent, but just enough to make them stick a little bit better than they were sticking before. So now we get to the fun part. I'm going to take my smaller scissors and I'm going to cut on the cutting lines. These are the solid lines just around the outside. So I'm going to go all the way around. I'm going to do it slowly and carefully. I want to make sure that the lines that I cut are as close as possible to the lines that were on the original pattern. And when I come to cutting these pieces that have lots of tiny pieces inside them, what I'm going to do right at the moment is only cut around the very outside of them. So just right around the edge, and you'll see there's a solid line all the way around the edge showing me where to cut. So now I have all my pieces cut. I've got the pieces cut out of fabric 2 and the pieces cut out of fabric 1. And I'm going to put them in a couple of piles. One of the things that we need to do is match them up. So this piece and this piece, they are both going to go there. So that's the right flipper. So, and this is the head. So we've got the top head and the bottom head. And we've got these two pieces, the shoulder and the neck, they're just by themselves. And then we've got the left flipper, the top and bottom piece. And I'm going to start by putting together the carapace. So what we need to do is take it so that the front side of the fabric is facing up. So that's the bottom piece. And now we're going to put the top piece on top of it. But of course, when we actually stick it on, it's going to be all cut like this into pieces. So I'm going to start by cutting a nice big piece so that you can see. I'm going to cut this piece here. And I'm cutting along the solid cutting line. So then I've had it this way up so that I can see the line to cut. Now I'm going to flip it over and put it this way up. So I'm going to line up the top piece and the bottom piece. And now, with the edges lined up together, and now it's pretty obvious where this piece goes. So what I'm going to do, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and I call it the jigsaw puzzle method. But to me it's like when you've done a jigsaw puzzle and you got one piece left, And you pick up the piece and you know where that last piece goes because there's a hole that's just the right shape. So I'm going to, there we go, take this piece off. And now I'm sticking just the fabric down to match this hole. So that was a nice big one, that's easy to do. But I'll bet you're wondering how to do this piece. It's got something like 100 little tiny pieces. So it's exactly the same. And I can tell you that these two pieces line up really quite well together. So if I cut these pieces out and put them on there using that method, they're going to line up pretty well. So I'm going to start on an edge just because it's easier to do. So I flip the piece back over, I take off the backing, and here's where the tweezers sometimes are helpful. And I can see when I line this piece back up again, I can see a hole that's just the same shape as this piece. So I'm going to put this piece in right there. And I'm just going to keep on doing this until I've done all the pieces. So there are quite a lot of pieces here, but and it takes a fair length of time to cut them out like this. But you don't have to. You can sit there with a glass of wine or a cup of tea and do it. I often will take them downstairs. I take a big tray or sometimes a cutting board, and I just set that on my lap, and I sit there and with a piece and do it while I'm watching TV. I've left the project overnight, and one of the things that you might not know about Steam 2 or other similar products is that if you leave them for a long period of time in the air, they can tend to curl up. It doesn't really cause a problem, but it can make them a little bit more difficult to work with. So what I've done is I put it inside a large Ziploc bag. So now I can pull all these things out and everything's ready to work with. And you can see that I've got this, this flipper is now complete. And one of the things that I want to do with it before I identify it as fully complete is I'm just going to go around and check. I've put them down the way they came up and using the method that I showed you, this jigsaw puzzle method. But some of them might just not look fully centered to me, so I might just reposition them a little bit. If they stick over the edges of the underneath piece, it's not a problem. In fact, it can look pretty natural. So here, for example, you can see they do stick out over the edge, and that's intentional. The scales stick out a little bit over the underneath fabric. With this one, you can see that, especially with the big pieces, there can be a little bit of distortion. Once you start cutting them, some of the tension gets relieved in the fabric and it might distort a little bit. Nothing to worry about there. If you want to do some cutting around the outside, you can do that if you have to in order to make everything fit. This one you can see is a little bit non-centered. So at this point, it doesn't really matter if it's in the exact right spot according to the pattern, because once again, no one's comparing the pattern to your piece. What you want is to make sure that it looks balanced to you. So roughly the same amount of space in between each of the scales, and just sort of nicely balanced. The last piece that we're going to do is the head. And when you cut the piece out, you were cutting along all of the solid lines. And of course the solid lines, there's also these solid lines in here. So I'm going to cut this is the eye. And I'm going to, these scissors are a little sharper, I'm going to cut again the nostrils. You're going to need to do this cut it's a little detailed, but if you get it right, it'll make all the difference. Now you need to make sure that these holes are smooth. Can't have any sharp edges on a nostril. So there we go. Check it from the other side, it looks fine. So that's the underneath piece. And so now we're going to do the exact same thing with the upper piece. And I'm going to start with this big piece towards the neck. It doesn't really matter where you start. And I'm going to do this exactly the same way that I did the other pieces. Now we're down to the last few pieces on the head, and these are the pieces that are right here. These are along the ridge of the brow, and as you can see, that's the right eye, the brow ridge, and this is the left eye, brow ridge. These are small pieces, and these are the ones that really need to be as close as you can get to being the same as the pattern. And the reason for that is, like with any creature, getting the eye right goes a long way towards making it look like the animal that you're trying to make it look like. So I'm going to cut this little piece and put it on, and I'm going to do that for all of the pieces down this side of the eye. And I'm going to use the exact same method as before, all the way down. And you can see that I've cut away everything except just these little outline bits. That's enough for me to find my way and make sure that the piece is in the right spot. Now we come to the fun bit. We're going to assemble the quilt top from all the pieces that we've just made. I started by taking the the background piece, the fabric 3, and I've cut it into a shape of 32 by 40 inches. You can make it a little bigger than that if you want. It's really just a question of how much extra ocean you have around the side of your turtle. And then I'm using the layout drawing underneath here so that I can see where all the pieces go. You might find it easier to tape the layout drawing onto a window and then put your fabric 3, tape that over top of the layout drawing. But I'm just going to work with it like this, and it shouldn't be too hard. So I'm going to start with the carapace, the biggest piece. I want to make sure I get that in the right spot. And I've already taken this bit off because it's a little bit complicated to. So that goes down like that. I'm just going to press it down now. Then I've got this piece, the shoulder, and it's going to go over here underneath. This piece is the neck and the shoulder on the other side, and you can see where the placement lines are. That tells us that we want about a 3/8 of an inch overlap. So I'm going to place this. Basically, I'm going to start by overlapping it this way. Then I'm going to place it, smooth it down a bit there, and then lift this up, and then put this piece down under it. Now that all looks nice and flat. I'm going to take the flipper, and stick it on right about here. And I'm going to take this other flipper, and I'm going to stick it on over here. And then I'm going to take the head and put it in the spot where it should just fit like a glove. Oh no, I can see this flipper needs to get moved up a little bit. This is why you need it to be repositionable. This is really great product where you can make sure everything is right before you have to actually commit. There we go. Now the last step is I've taken this little tiny piece of black. Now this is the only fabric in the kit that I don't dye myself. It's just a solid black. And but it's the same fabric. It's the cotton lawn. I'm going to need to cut a piece of black to go underneath the eye and to go underneath the nostrils there. Now you can, for the nostrils, if you don't want to use this method, you could just thread paint them in later. But I think it looks better to have the nostrils underneath rather than above. That's going to fit. So I just used a bit of spare steam seam that was left over from the other pieces. I'm going to cut it like this and stick it under there. It's probably easier if I stick it to the bottom of this piece rather than sticking it to the background. So it can go like, oops, like that. It's really not sticking on, is it? And then I can just trim it to make sure that nothing sticks out. And then this eye piece I'm also going to put in behind. There we go. So we're all finished. We've made this turtle and counter quilt top. The only thing we have left to do on the quilt top is to iron down all the pieces according to the manufacturer's directions. We want to make sure that everything is good and solid and ironed down onto the background so that it doesn't come off. And in particular, on some of these small pieces, we're not actually going to be quilting on top of the scales, only around them. And so the only thing holding them onto the quilt top will be the adhesive that's in the product.
So that's it for the applique side of the quilt top. Now Sue's going to jump into finishing the quilt top.
Hi, I'm Sue Sherman from Sue Sherman Quilts, and I'm back to show you how to quilt this quilt top for the turtle and counter quilt that we made last time. As you can see, I have my quilt top from the previous video, and since that last video I've pressed it according to the manufacturer's directions for the Seam 2. I've pressed it down so that it is very, very firmly attached. All layers are attached, and now I'm going to be able to quilt. And even though I won't actually quilt over top of some of these pieces, they'll be well held down by the adhesive. In order to make this quilt, I'm going to need the quilt top that we previously made. I'll need some batting, and this is 80-20 batting. It's cotton polyester, but you can use any kind of batting. Some people like to use something with a little bit of loft to it. I like to use wool for that sometimes. Not crazy about polyester, but there's really nothing wrong with that if you'd like to have a little loft in your quilt. And then I have a backing piece. It's another piece of cotton. It's actually the same cotton lawn from the upper fabric, but just a little bit bigger than the quilt top. The next thing that I'm going to need is some thread. So I have one color thread for each of my 3 fabrics. This one is for fabric 1, which is the lighter yellowish beigeish color. This one's for fabric 2, which is the darker green, so anywhere that I'm going right on top of this upper fabric 2. And then this is for fabric 3. I've chosen these particular colors to blend in. They are tri-lobal polyester thread. I like it for its sheen. I think particularly for an underwater natural looking quilt, I like something that has a little bit of sheen, not too much. And I like to use colors that are pretty similar to my background colors, but that's not a hard and fast rule. You can use any colors that you think would be good, and sometimes the selection of colors for the quilting is very personal, and it shows your own creative side. The other color that I need is black, and it's again a tri-lobal polyester, and I'm going to use it in these areas where we have creases in the neck and the shoulders of the turtle, and this is to make it look a lot more natural. In your bobbin, you can use the same thread. That will work very well. I find that if I'm using a lot of different colors in quilting, particularly an artistic quilt, I don't like to have to change the bobbin thread so much, so I like to use an invisible thread. And the invisible thread that I'm using is monopoly. It works really well, provided that when you fill your bobbin, you need to fill it very, very slowly and only fill it half full or even less than half full. If you follow those 2 rules, it should work quite well for you. The other thing I'm going to use that might be a little bit different is a non-stick needle. This is something that I found will really help with the success of the quilt. By using a non-stick needle, it means that when your machine is going through some of these areas that might have the Seam 2 on them, even a little bit of gumminess on your needle can play havoc with your tension and often can lead to broken thread. So I find that the non-stick needles really, really help there. So before I make my quilt sandwich, the last thing that I'm going to do is turn it over. And you'll remember that when we did the Carapace, we only had the seam around the outside. The actual Carapace is not completely stuck down to the background all the way across, which means that if I go to the back I can actually pull it apart. So this is just one more layer that I don't want to have to quilt through. And like with a lot of applique, it can be cut out. And I'm going to very carefully cut as much of this away as I can. And I'm using very sharp scissors because despite being worried with sharp scissors that I might accidentally cut something that I don't want to cut, I find that really, really sharp scissors are actually give me better control. So now I've basted my quilt sandwich, and I've used pins for that. Sometimes I use straight pins. Regular safety pins are a little safer and a little easier. Sometimes I baste it using thread, and I just use really, really big stitches across. The one thing I don't ever use on this is an adhesive base, a spray basting product, because once again I don't want to introduce any more adhesive into the project than I already had, and that can cause some problems with gumminess in the needle. I am going to show two different ways of quilting this. The first way is the more usual way, and it's using free motion quilting. For that I'm going to use my Bernina Q20. It's a long arm machine, but it's a sit down long arm machine setup, so that the way I use it is exactly the same as the way you would use a domestic sewing machine to do free motion quilting. And the reason I use my long arm for this is because there's a lot more visibility in here. You can see what I'm doing a lot more easily. The second way I'm going to do it will be to use my domestic sewing machine using the walking foot, which might seem a little bit unusual for quilting, especially something that's as round as this. But I wanted to make sure that anyone who might feel intimidated by doing free motion quilting for a project like this, that there are alternatives. The very, very first time I quilted a turtle flipper, I did it using my walking foot, and it did work out, and you can't really tell. But I can say in the long run it's easier to do it using free motion quilting if you're comfortable doing it that way. I'm going to start by pulling my thread through, so just one stitch, and then pull a little bit, being careful not to get my fingers underneath. Then I'm going to do a lock stitch, and then I'm going to start, oops, I need my glasses for this. I'm going to start quilting very, very slowly. So before I go any further, I'm going to cut this additional thread, the top and the bottom thread. And now I'm going to continue, and basically I'm going to go around every single one of these these scales. So you'll notice that I'm going very, very slowly. And the reason for that is because if it goes a lot faster, I can do a little faster maybe, but it will cause my thread to get stretched out, and I'll end up with problems with my thread shredding. Doing it slowly like this is a little bit boring, but it actually helps get it a little bit more exact. what you can see I have here is a nice little turtle flipper, and in between each of the big scales I've quilted in between there, and it makes the flipper, the scale stand out just a little bit, and it really does make it look quite realistic. Now I've threaded my machine with the black, and I'm going to do some of the creases in the neck. And I'm going to start down here, and just think in terms of the neck is round here, and I want to make a crease kind of along like that. In the shoulder, I want creases in here because this is an arm that would go like that and that, so the creases are going to be down here. Creases are marked on the pattern if you wish to do that. I tend to just put them where they make sense to me. So I'm going to start here, and again with a lifting my thread up through, so my top and bottom threads are both in my hand. I'm going to start with a lock stitch, cut the thread, and then just do creases. I'm going to form the case one sketch of my header, then on the third and my flash. Okay, I'm going to leave just a little bit of this so that I can show you how we can do that with the walking foot on the other machine. Now then, let's talk about what to do on the turtle shell. What we have here is stitching in between the turtle shells. So now each shell is a little bit hard, and it looks kind of like a natural turtle shell. And one of the things that I often like to do is just leave it like this. I think it looks nice. I know a lot of people don't like to leave large areas unquilted when we've got relatively close areas of quilting elsewhere on the quilt. This is an art quilt, so those rules don't really apply in the same way. With art quilts, what we mostly want to do is make sure that we don't have any areas where it puckers. But in this case, it's not going to pucker. All the quilting, which is going to end up being around this, will bring it in a little bit, but the stiffness of the steam seam is going to hold it, so it's actually going to make it stand out and really look quite realistic, and I like the way that looks. So I'm just going to leave that like that for now. But again, as I said, you've only got one layer of steam seam and a couple of layers of fabric here. So if you want to do like an all-over stipple pattern on this, that's another way to do it, and I have done it like that before. So the next step is going to be to do the face. And there's a couple of things here. We're going to do all around all of the scales on the face, just the same way that we did on the flipper. But then when we get to this here and all of this area down there in around where the mouth is, we are going to do it differently. So what I'd like to do now is just free motion quilt around all these scales, and then once we get that done, we're going to show you how to do the eye and the mouth and the free motion quilting along the top of this, just to make it, these scales are not scaly, they're a lot more integral to the face, so we're going to do a different technique on that. So I'm going to start by once again setting my machine to free motion quilt around these. Steady as she goes, nice and slow. I know you've seen this before. If you start to get bored of seeing it, it means you know what you're doing. There, that's done. So now what I've done for the head is I've used the pattern layout drawing to show the placement of the mouth and the lines around the eye. And I've just used a silver quilt marking pencil. You can use whatever kind of pen or pencil that you prefer to use to mark. I'm going to use some black thread for some of this and some green thread for some of it. So just starting down here, I'm going to trace the line of the mouth. And again, a bit of a lock thread, a lock stitch. And now I'm tracing along the mouth. And I'm going to go back over this just so it's a little bit darker. Lock stitch. Now with the same black thread, I'm going to go around the iris and the pupil within the eye. And this is a little bit more scary, but you're doing it with black on black. It's really, the eye is really very, very dark. So with doing it black on black, you do get that definition of the eyeball, but it's not a really, really strong definition. And if you happen to make a little boo-boo, nobody's really going to see that. Now I'm going to jump over and do the iris. I'm going to go around. And then I'm going to go across and just kind of stipple in here. To give a little texture. Now these lines that go above here, I'm going to do one of them in black, or a couple of them in black, and then there's this kind of alligator skin looking stuff that goes up above the eye, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. Let me get this done. So And this part I'm just going to do with the free motion, because I think it's pretty easy to see how you would do this with the walking foot. So I'm just doing this in the free motion. And I'm just picking up my needle and going across. I am doing a lock stitch at the beginning and end of each of these lines, but I don't need to actually cut my thread until I'm done all of them. That way this just uses less thread. So cut the thread at the beginning and the end, cut the underneath thread, and now just in between these two lines, you can see when I went from this line to this line, I didn't cut the thread, so I have to cut it now. And if you're having trouble getting a good cut there, you can always use your tweezers. So now I've changed to the darker green thread, and what I need to do is this stipply kind of alligator looking pattern along here. And I'm going to do that with the darker green thread. It is marked on the layout drawing, so you could use what's there, but I'm just going to kind of wing it and start here and do a bit of a lock stitch, and now and I do apologize for the loudness of my needle. I am using a size 14 needle, which is a bigger needle than you might use for cotton lawn, but I'm using it because I want a fairly hefty needle to go through all of this this fabric and adhesive. So if I wasn't doing a video, it wouldn't be a problem at all, but it does make a bit of noise. So as you can see there, it's starting to look a little bit more realistic. Now the last thing that I want to do is some up and down, just kind of scratchy marks. If you notice, if you look at a photograph of a sea turtle, they eat algae off rocks and off coral. And as a result, their mouths are constantly doing this on the coral, and it really scrapes them up. So this part of their mouth is kind of all scraped up, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. I'm just going to start here, and I'm going to just go up and down, and to give it a bit of a scrapey look, I'm going to go over the lines as well. This is just, it's a bit of green color on the mouth. Alrighty, so I cut that. I'm going to cut that thread in between the two pieces. Cut the back. And there we have the face. These areas here that have no quilting on them now, I'm not going to quilt those. Later on, when we do the background, we're going to go all the way around the outside, but that stitching is going to be on the background, so I'm not doing it right now. So now I'm going to show you how to do the other flipper. That's the left flipper, and I'm going to do that on my my domestic sewing machine. I'm going to do it using the ordinary walking foot, and I've got a stitch length of 2.5 millimeters, and it's just like sewing any other seam. I start here, I'm going to go put my needle down and up once to bring the thread through so that I have the top and the bottom threads both in my hand. I'm going to start with a lock stitch and then just start sewing. And I'm going to sew basically in between all the lines the way I did before. One of the things that I can do with this that I couldn't do with my free motion is I can go backwards. So I am going to just stitch backwards here, and then I'm going to turn. So it's a combination of sharp turns with the presser foot up, and some slow turns where I'm just forcing the material through. So very, very slowly, but we were going very slowly before anyway, so that's not really different. It's going to require a little bit more brute force than the other method, and it might require a little bit more time. I'm not very happy with that. It's a little bit too much of a straight line. I think we want to try to go slowly. Actually, I can set my machine to go more slowly. I have the same needle in here as I was using on the long arm machine. This is a non-stick needle. So it makes me want to use some gloves. I don't actually have any good quilting gloves. If you have them, that might be helpful to get the material to go through properly. But what you really want to do is what I'm doing here now. Rather than trying to make the material, or rather than going a few stitches straight and then turn, you want to try to turn pretty much with every stitch so that it's a gradual turn. And if you can't do it with the fabric under the presser foot, then just disengage the presser foot, and then you can go and you can turn around. This is, I would say, it's possibly a little easier if you're not used to working with a free motion quilting. This could be easier. And as I say, when I first made my first turtle quilt, I had virtually zero experience in free motion quilting, and it scared the life out of me, the thought of free motioning on the quilt after I was so proud of the quilt top. But now I actually find it's easier. It's certainly faster to do it free motion, but this method gets it done. One thing I should mention as well is it bunches up really nicely in here. The whole quilt really bunches up pretty small. And again, all of these measures that we've taken to reduce the amount of stiff adhesive in the quilt has really gone a long way towards doing that. The first time I ever made a quilt using this kind of technique with the raw applique and the steam seam, I actually was using the regular steam seam, not light. And it was a quilt where I had, in a couple of places, I had 2 layers of it. And I actually used a spray basting as well to hold the layers together. And it was like quilting plywood. It was terrible. So I'm just going to go on this one. I'm going to go a little backwards just because I am only, I only have a little bit to go here in that direction, and then I'm going to go, back forward again. Now it's time to finish off the creases that are in the neck and shoulder area. And I'm going to finish them off again using my walking foot. So I'll start by just getting my my threads through again. You can't see the bottom one because it's invisible. I'll do a lock stitch, and now I'm going to just do more creases. And I'm going to do it because I'm using a walking foot. In order to make the curve, to make it wavy, I have to do it with by twisting my fabric back and forth. And now I'm turning the fabric around to go back the other way. I could do it backwards as well, but I think I have better control like this. And then I'll lock stitch at the end and cut the thread. And cut off the beginning thread. So you can see that using this method on the neck and shoulders is going to give me pretty much the same results that I had from the free motion. So now I've finished quilting the turtle, and it's time to quilt the background. There's a couple of different ways that we can go about doing the all-over pattern for the ocean. And also, although I normally just do an all-over pattern for the ocean, there are other things that you could do here as well. The quilt is called Turtle Encounter because, to me, this is about the experience of meeting a turtle when you're swimming. And it's just you and the turtle, and you're in the open ocean and there's nothing else around. And I've had that experience a few times in my life, and it's breathtaking. And that is what I wanted to capture in this turtle. So to me, all I want to show is ocean with a kind of nebulous stuff behind it. Or, and sometimes when I've made this, it's been just with a plain turquoise background, just to show really, really open ocean. What I've got here in this fabric, to me, is the sort of background that you get when there's a reef somewhere back there and there's other things going on. It's kind of modeled all in the background, and all we want to show is the ocean. I can tell you that some people who've made this quilt have also put coral and things down at the bottom so that the turtle does eat algae from the coral, so you might have a piece of coral here, maybe another fish. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. So there are two ways that I'd like to show you to do the ocean. One of them is using the all-over circles, which I think is the most effective. Some people don't like or maybe find them a little bit too intimidating. So I do have an alternate method in case that you would prefer it. So for the circles, one of the things that I find handy is just to take a piece of paper like this that has circles printed on it in gray. And I want to show you two ways of doing the circles. And it's always a good idea to start by just tracing it by hand. Now, a lot of people, when they do these all over circles, they'll start and they'll trace one circle. They'll go all around it. And then they find the next circle and they go all the way around it. And then they have to go retrace to the next circle and go all the way around it. And then retrace and go around the next circle. And that's certainly a way to do it. Each circle you can have some time to plan. Once you get to the next circle, you can stop for a sec, think about where you want this circle to go and how big you want it to be. I like having all the circles different sizes for no better reason than by having them all different sizes. If they were all the same size, then if one was a little bit different, it would really stand out. But if they're all different sizes, then no one really cares. Also, I'd like to say this is ocean. If they're not perfectly circular, it really looks fine. What you're looking for is the effect of all these circles when you stand back a little bit. So that's the way that I did it when I first tried doing circles, and I have to tell you that no one actually taught me how to do this, so there might be a better way. But what I do is I start and I go around, and then when I get about halfway around, I find the next circle and I go about halfway around it. And then I find the next circle and I go about halfway around it. And then about halfway around the next circle. And then halfway around the next circle. And then I go all the way around the last circle, and then I follow these circles all the way home. And what I've got with this is a way of making my circles with less retracing of my steps. So let's just go over that one more time. All of the circles are tangents to each other, which means that they touch only at one point. This circle touches that circle only at one point. And it's at that point that I need to make the change in the curvature of my line. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to go around back to where it touches this next circle. Now I'm going to go part way around this circle until I get to this circle. Then I'm going to go part way around that circle till I get to this circle, part way around that one, till let's try this smaller one, and now part way around this one, and now I'm going to come back. And so you see there is no part of this line that is not on one of those circles. So now let's try it on a blank sheet of paper. Just pretend you can't see that other stuff. So I would really recommend that you try it a few times yourself. Now, to be honest, I can draw a better circle with my free motion quilting than I can with a pen. But basically what I'm doing is practicing, and of course the circles can be any size I want them to be. If I take it a little bit further, then I'm going to be heading in another direction. So remember that when I finish this circle and start doing the next circle, I have to be a tangent to it. So I've never stopped being part of this circle. Now my pen has stopped, and now I have to be part of another circle. And I'm never going to draw any straight lines in between them. So I would recommend that you try doing this on paper a few times before you try doing it on your fabric. So before I try doing circles on my quilt, I'm going to just try it on the scrap. You might recognize it. This is the piece of fabric that I cut out from behind the carapace of the turtle. And I'm just going to start down here, or maybe over here, and do a few circles. So I've got the same thread, the same fabric. I think that might just help me know if I'm doing what I want. And I'm doing a few circles, just round circles, just to get me started, just so that I can get comfortable with the idea of doing a circle. Okay, now I'm going to go and I would just practice this until I'm really comfortable with the technique, to the point that I think I'm ready to go on the turtle quilt. So I'm going to start here in the corner, and I'm going to just pull my thread through, hold the two threads here, do a little bit of a lock stitch, and then go around in one circle. And just cut these threads here, get them out of my way. And now I'm going to go just like what I did on the paper with my pen. I'm going to go around so that's not terribly good. I'll get better as I go along. So what I've got here is 4 sort of circles, and I'm going to go around here, trying to get my circles as round as I can get them, but not fussing too much if they're not. So now I'm going to go around like that, and before the circle's finished, I'm going to go around the opposite way. Back again. Before I finish there, I'm going to go over here and do a couple of circles in there. So now I'm back at the beginning, and you can see these circles are a lot better. So there's 2 secrets to this. First of all, don't get caught into thinking that you're just doing a squiggly line. Every time you do this little S-curve, you have to be thinking about where that circle is going. This is going to be a circle that's like that. Now I'm leaving it, and I'm going off and doing a little circle here, but I'm still thinking of that as a circle. And now I'm going to leave that one and go off and do another circle here. And you're not just doing random a random S-curve. So back to home. Now I can talk to you about doing this until the cows come home, but basically this is it. This is the whole technique. The only other thing that I will need to show you, and I'll show it now, my way over to the actual turtle. And what I like to do is go all the way around, stitch in the ditch, making sure that I am on the ocean, not the turtle. So now I've gone all the way around the turtle and I'm back to where I started. So I finish off this line of stitching and then I come back to the circles that I had half finished. And I'm going to go back and finish them. And you'll notice this one here, when I get to it, there's a void up there that needs a circle. So I'm going to finish off this circle before I do that one. So now it's just a question of completing these circles over the rest of the quilt. And typically it takes me as long or longer to do these circles as it's taken to do the rest of the quilting. So the last quilting technique I want to show is how to do basically a wavy line across the fabric. So this is what you might do if you're using free motion quilting but you're not comfortable with doing the circles. You might also do this if you're going to do it with your presser foot. This is something you can do with a presser foot. And it's really simple. You just start at one end and you do a wavy line. And all your wavy lines you want them, I usually do them between say 3/4 of an inch and a 1/2 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch apart. So they're kind of randomly wavy. So sometimes they're going to be parallel to the next line, and sometimes they're going to be go in contrary motion. So I think you can see that if you do wavy lines like this all the way across your quilt, it looks a little bit like waves in the ocean. So I've completed the quilting, and I've added a few little extra bits of quilting in this area to make it balanced, I think. And now we're ready to trim. So it was 32 by 40, the original piece that I had. You could make it a little bit bigger if you want, but I chose to do it exactly as it said in the pattern. Now when I trim this, it's of course going to be a little bit less than that. So I'm going to trim it to be exactly square using my trusty rotary cutter. So my quilt has been trimmed and it's all ready for the facings and the hanging sleeve. Now normally for a regular bed quilt you would put binding on your quilt, and you can certainly do that on an art quilt. There's nothing wrong with that. I think personally I like the finish better, of a clean finish, so you don't see an edge. It's just going to be turned over and with a facing. The other thing is when I'm doing a quilt that's depicting a wild animal, I prefer to have an edge that just goes off into the distance. I don't like to see a binding around it. That looks to me like you're putting it in a cage or a frame. Obviously you're not caging a wild animal, so if you prefer the look of it that way, and a lot of people do like to see it in a nice neat frame, certainly go ahead and do it that way. If you go back to the pieces that you cut off your fabric 3, you should have enough here to make the facings. So I've got this piece and I've got this piece that I cut off. And what I need is a piece that's this wide. So the original cut was 40 inches. After quilting and trimming, it's now down to about 38 inches. So I'm going to measure it exactly, and I'm going to make a piece that's 38 inches long and 1.5 inches wide. And I'm going to use that to make a facing. I'm going to make a second one that same size, 38 by 1.5 at this end. And then on these two sides, I'm going to cut a piece that's whatever that length is, and I think it's around 30 inches. So it's going to be 30 inches long by 1.5 inches wide. And then I'm going to fold over the long edge, stitch it on, and then I will hand stitch the facing in place. There are lots of places on YouTube where you can find instructions, very detailed instructions on how to make a facing if this is not something you've done before. Similarly, you're going to need a hanging sleeve. There probably isn't enough fabric here to make a hanging sleeve unless you make a very small one. Typically, they are 8.5 inches of fabric by the length of your, or by the width of your piece. So just any old fabric is going to work for that. It's not going to show on the front side. And once again, there are plenty of videos on YouTube showing how to make those. In particular, the one at AQS, their website, American Quilters, is quite a good video on how to make a hanging sleeve. So, I will leave you with the completed quilt, and hope to see you again.
I hope you enjoyed your time here with Sue Sherman and me and Delilah here with Cottage Treasures Quilting. Please leave some comments, some likes, subscribe. Again, all of Sue Sherman's patterns and kits are available on our website at cottagetreasures.store. COVID-19 is on its way out, so let's start giving you some new content. Have a great day and see you next time.